Hello guys, Uncle Sam here. Before you watch this part 3, if you have not watched part 1 and 2, please go and watch them. You will have a better understanding when you do. Let's get into the story. It all started one night. A young man named Jack was sitting in the living room. Snakes appeared from nowhere and filled the living room. They were coming towards him to attack him. As they got closer, he screamed and woke up. It was just a dream. He became worried, and he asked himself, what is going on with me? Why am I having this same dream over and over again? Later that morning, as Jack was getting ready for work, he told his younger sister Lisa that he had that same dream about snakes again. Lisa told him, "It's high time you come see my pastor, because the dreams are getting too much." Jack, who does not believe in pastors and churches, said, "No, it's fine. I will find my own way to get answers," and left for work. It's been 3 months since Mr. Royce was discharged from the hospital. His car insurance company finally paid him $2.5 million for the damage on his car after their investigation. Aside the $5 million he was given by the politician whose son was high on drugs and crashed into him, he employed a personal assistant who is also his driver, since he can't work anymore. With help of few former colleagues from the company he was working before the accident, he started his own small steel company where they mold irons and shape iron for building purpose. So his personal assistant/driver, whose name is Lucky, lives with him in the same house as a full-time worker, and he takes him everywhere he wants to go. Due to his condition of being on the wheelchair, his younger daughters Linda and Marcy are not always happy to see their father, who was full of life, now sitting on a wheelchair. They blamed Alice for it, so Mr. Royce made a decision. He decided to send Linda and Marcy to go finish their matric overseas. He did it to give them time to heal and also focus on their studies. As Linda and Marcy boarded the plane, Mr. Royce and Alice were still at the airport when Mr. Royce received a call from the Great One. The Great One said, "Mr. Royce, there is trouble. Please come to my place at once." Alice asked her father what it was. He said, "Nothing, it is fine." So Mr. Royce dropped Alice at school and headed straight to the Great One's house. As he got there, the Great One wasn't looking so great. He looked very scared. He asked Mr. Royce, "Have you been having a nightmare about the white snake?" Mr. Royce replied, "Yes, but I felt it was just due to what I went through." The Great One asked, "What do you see when you have these nightmares?" Mr. Royce replied, "The white snake will come to me and sit next to me. Sometimes it will just lie on my body, but it doesn't do me any harm." The Great One replied, "Why didn't you tell me? There is a big problem, and this time, we might not find it as easy as it was with Oscar." Mr. Royce was confused. He asked, "What is going on?" The Great One said, "That night you went to Oscar's place. Remember I told you Oscar will have to use his blood to call back the ring, and when he is done with the rituals, he will be paralyzed on one leg." Mr. Royce replied, "Yes, I remember." The Great One said, "Oscar managed to summon the ring, but before he could finish the rituals you took the ring, and remember you told me when you took the ring the snake fell back on the bed?" Mr. Royce replied, "Yes." The Great One continued, "That ring is more like food to the snake. It has the controlling power over the snake, so when you took the ring, the snake became powerless. It could not attack you. But I want to ask you, did your blood touch the ring that night?" Mr. Royce thought for a while. "I think so, because I was shot twice, you remember." The Great One said, "That is the problem now. Instead of Oscar's blood to mix with the ring that night, to complete the sacrifice, before the snake is given the ring to swallow, your blood was what mixed with the ring. That is why the snake comes to you every night, and because you are not a member of the Snake Great Altar, it has created a problem in their meeting. You see, to join that altar, someone has to bring you in and stand with his blood for you. so Oscar was brought in by a man named Mr. Don. Mr. Don is over 183 years old. He is well connected to most of the top men in this country, so he is very powerful. Mr. Don is responsible for Oscar, because he introduced Oscar to the snake altar. He used his blood and stood for Oscar as part of the covenant of brotherhood, so only Oscar's blood and his own blood is allowed to touch that ring. That night, as your blood touched the ring, it became a problem because it means the ring has found a new member who will replace Oscar, and if the member does not rise and take his place at the snake altar, the man that initiated Oscar, which is Mr. Don, his body will start to decay until he brings back the ring or make sure the new member accepts his place and become a slave to the snake and also become immortal. So, you see, is either you join them or return the ring. Mr. Royce was shocked. He shouted, "Join who? For what?" Then he asked the Great One, "How did you know all this?" The Great One kept quiet. "Please tell me, how did you get all these informations? And how did you know the man's name?" The Great One finally replied, "I met the man that initiated Oscar. He was here. His name is Mr. Don. He is a very dangerous man. He has given us 2 days to decide. You either agree and join the altar, or we bring the ring back to him." Mr. Royce asked, "And if we can't find the ring, what happens?" The Great One said, "Then we are dead." Mr. Royce asked, "So if I decide to join them, what will happen?" The Great One replied, "You will have to kill all your family to complete the sacrifice." He added, "My son, there is no win-win on this one." Mr. Royce was sad. He said, "There must be a way. I can't lose my whole family, the very thing I love and will lay down my life to save." The Great One asked, "So where is the ring? Where did you keep the ring?" Mr. Royce replied, "I don't know. It meant nothing to me. As I came in here, I passed out. I only wake up in the hospital." The Great One replied, "Then we have to run and hide first, before we know what to do." "Run and hide," Mr. Royce replied. "In case you forgot, I am on a wheelchair. How can I run?" Mr. Royce said, "So you cannot do anything about this?" The Great One said, "I can, but I need time to know more. But we don't have time, we need the ring." Mr. Royce thought for a second and said, "Alice. I have to call Alice." He took out his phone and called Alice, and asked her if she was okay. She said yes. He told her to stay in school, he will come and get her. Then he asked her, "Did you see any ring in the car when I came back from Oscar's house?" Alice said no, she didn't see it. She only took the car to the car wash, when the Great One turned her back into human. But she asked a friend she knows at the car wash to wash the car secretly, because of the blood. Mr. Royce asked, "What is the name of the person who washed the car?" And Alice replied, "Jack." It was Jack, at our usual car wash. Then he drops the call and told the Great One, "I need to go now. I will see you tomorrow. Let me go and look for the ring." He called Lucky, his driver, in, and Lucky wheeled him back to his car. At the car wash, he asked for Jack, and they said Jack called in sick, that he didn't come to work. So he went to Jack's place and found Jack's sister. She told him the whole story of how Jack has been seeing snakes, that Jack was bitten by a snake in the dream, but the hospital said there is nothing wrong with him. So, she took him to her pastor, that Jack is at church. Mr. Roy said she should take him to the church. As they were talking, his phone rings. It was Alice. He picked the call and heard the voice of a man. The man said, "My name is Don. I am sure you know what I want. I have your daughter Alice. I need that ring or else she will die. You have 1 day to bring me the ring. I will text you the location. Call me when you have it," and he hangs up. Mr. Royce was shocked and confused at the same time. He is back to losing Alice all over again. He called the Great One, but he didn't pick his calls, so he went to the church with Lisa, Jack's younger sister. As they got there, Lucky his driver waited in the car. Mr. Royce and Lisa went in to see the pastor, and he introduced himself as Pastor John. He took them to where Jack was resting. Jack was feeling much better. He apologized to Mr. Royce for taking the ring. He said he saw the ring in the car when Alice brought the car for him to wash and he took it, that the ring is in his house. The pastor cut in and said, "The ring is the reason why Jack has been seeing snakes. That ring is devilish. They need to destroy it." Mr. Royce said, "No, he just wants the ring, that is all." So Jack told his sister Lisa where he hid the ring in the house. As Lisa and Mr. Royce were about to leave, to go back to Jack's place for the ring, the pastor called Mr. Royce to his office alone, and told him, "My brother, your life is in a great danger. If you go with that ring you might not come back alive." Mr. Royce said, "I have no option at the moment." The pastor said, "I can help you. God can help you, but you need to believe that all things are possible with God." Mr. Royce said, "Pastor, I don't have time. I just have to find a way to save my daughter's life," and he left with Lisa. They got to Jack's place and Lisa handed the ring over to Mr. Royce. He called the Great One's number again, but he didn't pick. As he was about to leave, Lisa said to him, "Sir, I am sorry my brother took the ring, but I want to tell you, Pastor John can help you." Mr. Royce said, "I already have someone to help me." Then he left, heading straight to the Great One's house. As they got to the Great One's house, it was already late at night. Lucky with Mr. Royce into the house. They found the Great One lying on his chair. He has been stabbed several times on the stomach. The whole place was ransacked. The Great One managed to say few words. He said, "Don came back here with his men. Don't take the ring to Don. He will not spare you and Alice." He said, "You need to find a way to save Alice, but you must burn the ring in fire to melt it. That is the only way you can defeat Mr. Don, or else, you and Alice will not survive." Then he died. Mr. Royce was confused. He shouted in anger, "How do I end this thing for good?" As Lucky wheeled him back to the car, Lucky told him, "Sir, I know it's not my place to give advice, but I know Pastor John. He can help you. Please sir, let us go back to him." They went back to the church that night and Pastor John told Mr. Royce, they can't go that night, that he will pray and seek the face of God, but the next day they will go. But since Don desperately wants the ring due to his body that is decaying, Mr. Royce should suggest a meeting place. So, Mr. Royce suggested his new company. He said, "I have the kind of fire that will melt the ring there. We can use there tomorrow night to meet with Don. I know the place in and out." So they agreed. The next day, early in the morning, Don called Mr. Royce and told him, "Today is the last day." Then Mr. Royce said, "I have your ring, and I am willing to exchange it for my daughter Alice, but we have to meet at my own location." Don said, "Name the place and time and I will be there." Mr. Royce said, "I will send you the location, but we will meet by 8 p.m. this night for the exchange." Don was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Mr. Royce, even if you come with all the policemen in this country, if I don't get my ring, I will end Alice, and no man on earth can touch me." He dropped the call. Later that morning, Lucky, Mr. Royce's driver, took Mr. Royce and Pastor John to the company for them to look at the place and plan how they will succeed without losing any life. Lucky, Mr. Royce's driver, was now part of the plan since he knows everything and has vowed to Mr. Royce that he will do his best to help him get his daughter back. As they got to the company, Mr. Royce showed Pastor John the whole place and they made their plans, while the workers were busy working and didn't have a clue what was going on. Later that night, Lucky drove Mr. Royce and Pastor John to the company and they parked the car at the back of the company. He switched on the machines that melt and mold irons and kept it running till it became very hot and ready to melt any metal that goes into it. After a while, a black car arrived at the company gate. The car parked inside the company. Alice came out and was standing with the driver of the car, who looked like a bodyguard. Don came down and walked in alone. He came with just Alice and his one bodyguard who stood next to Alice in front of their car. As he walked in, Mr. Royce was in his wheelchair and Pastor John was standing with him. As Don came in and saw them, he looked at Pastor John and said, "Who are you and why are you here? I have no business with you or your kind of people. Please can you leave here now?" Mr. Royce said, "What do you mean?" "He is my driver." Don laughed and said, "I am over 183 years old. I am not a boy, and I am not an ordinary man. Why will you bring a pastor here? What does he have to do with this? Is it because your great one is dead?" "Well, I don't want him here. He needs to leave or else your daughter will die." Pastor John cut in, "You evil man, you spirit of darkness, I command you to keep shut now in Jesus' name." Don moved backward in fear. He turned to Mr. Royce and said, "I can see you don't want your daughter alive. Give me my ring and we will end this now. If I give one command, your daughter is dead. Give me what belongs to me. Let me live here in peace and return overseas, and you will not see me again." Mr. Royce said, "Release Alice fast, and you will get your ring." Don's eyes started turning. It became very red. His voice changed, and he shouted, "Give me my ring now." Immediately, a big black snake appeared next to Don. It was trying to attack Mr. Royce and Pastor John, but for some reason, it could not move forward to strike them. Pastor John continued praying in a very loud voice. Lucky appeared at the back of Don's car with a shovel. He sneaked behind Alice and the bodyguard and hit the bodyguard with the shovel and he fell and fainted. Then he took Alice and he was taking her to safety. He shouted, "Alice is safe." Pastor John quickly threw the ring inside the fire. Immediately the big black snake disappeared and Don shouted. His body started changing into an old man. In few minutes he became very old and started gasping for breath. Then he fell on the ground and stopped breathing. Alice came in and hugged the father. After a short reunion, Pastor John prayed over Alice and his father and blessed them. He told Mr. Royce to stand up and he did. As he took 2 steps, they were all happy and excited. Story ends. Moral of this story: there is a way that seems right to a man, but the end is destruction. Secondly, always put your faith in God. He will never judge you, and with Him, all things are possible. I remain Uncle Sam. Stay safe.